You've stood in a parking lot and watched a 25-year-old truck fire on the first turn of the key, while something newer sat 2 spaces over with the hood up, waiting on a flatbed. And you've probably wondered what that old thing has that the new one doesn't. I'll give you the answer right now, instead of making you sit through 9 minutes to get it. It isn't strength, it's absence. Every engine on this list went past 300,000 miles because of what the factory left out, not what they put in. 5 engines. All American, all put to work in trucks, all still out there running. One of them gives you no warning at all before it destroys itself, and stopping it costs an afternoon and less than $100 in parts. One of them was never designed for a pickup. And the last one tells you exactly where this industry turned, because its only real weakness is the one thing every truck built today has more of. Start with the one that makes the case hardest. The Ford 300, because it proves the point harder than anything else on this list. And if you don't own a 30-year-old Ford, don't go anywhere. Everything that made this engine last is the exact thing your truck doesn't have. That's the whole video. Picture 2 of them sitting in the same lot. One's got 140,000 on the clock, the other's got 310, and the high mileage one is the better truck. That's not a freak story, that's ordinary for this engine, which means the odometer on a 300 tells you very little on its own. So what should you be reading instead? Start at the crankshaft. A main bearing is what the crank spins in, and plenty of straight 6s got by with 4 of them. Ford put 7 in this one. The crank carried on both sides of every piston. That's diesel practice. What it means to you standing in a driveway is that the bottom end is usually the last thing on a 300 to wear out, which is also why compression numbers on a high mileage one can read mediocre while the engine still has years in it. Move to the front of the engine. There's no timing chain. The camshaft is gear-driven, metal gear straight onto metal gear, so there's no chain stretch to chase, and one entire repair you will simply never pay for. Then put your hand on the cylinder head. Cast iron, at a point when most of the industry had gone to aluminum to save weight and money. Iron doesn't warp the way aluminum does when an engine gets hot. A 300 that overheated once and cooled down is usually still a good 300. On a lot of its contemporaries, that same afternoon meant a head gasket and a machine shop bill. Which brings you to the honest weakness, and it isn't durability. This engine is slow. Ford's truck engineering division built it to make its torque under 2,000 RPM and never rev, and that's the same decision that let it live forever. Loaded trailer, uphill on-ramp, it'll get there, but you're planning that merge a quarter mile out. That's why Ford ended it in '96. So how do you actually check one? Before you start it, while it's stone cold, pull the radiator cap and look at the coolant. Not milky, not rusty. Then start it, drive it, get it properly hot. 20 minutes, not 2. And once it's up to temperature, watch the oil pressure at idle. Clean coolant and pressure that holds hot, and the miles genuinely don't matter much. Pressure that sags at hot idle, and you walk, whatever the clock says. That tells you more about a 300 than a compression number will, because it's reading the 2 things that actually kill them, heat and oil starvation. And notice what this engine does for you. Both of those killers show up on a gauge before they show up as a repair bill. It warns you. Hold on to that, because it won't be true of all 5. Now a sound. You start a Chrysler 225 slant 6 and it ticks. Sewing machine tick, right off the top of the engine, and it doesn't quiet down as it warms. You will hear a confident diagnosis for that. Lifters are going, engine's tired, start pricing a rebuild. Before you believe it, check the year. Chrysler ran solid lifters in this engine through the 1980 model year. Hydraulics didn't arrive until '81. Solid lifters tick. They're meant to tick. What they need is periodic valve lash adjustment. Done hot, engine running, valve cover off. Which is exactly why plenty of shops won't take the job and would rather sell you something bigger. So on a pre-'81 engine, that tick is frequently maintenance rather than failure. It's worth an adjustment and a re-listen before it's worth a teardown. And that matters more than it sounds, because this is an engine people have thrown away while it was still healthy. So why is it healthy? Because of a compromise that had nothing to do with durability. Chrysler leaned this engine 30 degrees to get it under the low hood of a compact car. Packaging, nothing more. But a block sitting at that angle wants to flex, so they had to cast it heavier than it needed to be and carry the crankshaft up above the oil pan rails to stiffen the bottom end. They overbuilt it to solve a shape problem, and ended up with a truck engine that outlived the trucks. The buying test here isn't a symptom, it's a date. In mid-1976, Chrysler went from a forged steel crankshaft to a cast one, both run. The earlier one is what you want, if somebody's asking a premium, and it's worth knowing which is in front of you before you agree on a number. So, build date first. Before 76, forged crank. Pre-81, expect the tick and budget an adjustment. And take the lash figures from a service manual, not a forum, because they're specific and worth getting right. Second engine. Second problem you can hear coming. The third one starts on your driveway. There's a fresh spot of oil under the truck, back of the engine, roughly where it meets the transmission, and you've been topping it up for a month and pretending you haven't. That's the small block Chevy 350, Gen 1, 67 through 2003. And that spot is the leak you're most likely to meet on one. What you'll get told at most counters is that the rear main's gone and the engine's tired. Here's the part that changes what it costs you. Small blocks built before 1986 use a two-piece rear main seal, two halves with a joint in them. 86 and later use a one-piece. The two-piece is a known leak point by design, not proof that your engine is worn out, and rebuilders will tell you plainly to plan for it rather than be surprised by it. Why that's money and not trivia. On a lot of these, getting to a rear main means the transmission comes out. So when a seller shrugs and says all the old Chevys do that, he isn't wrong. He's also describing a job you'd be paying for. So work out which leak you've actually got before anybody quotes you. Valve cover leaks run down the sides of the engine. An oil pan gasket drips along the bottom rail. A rear main puts it at the bell housing seam, dead center at the back, and it typically gets worse the longer the truck sits and idles. Then get the casting number off the block. That's what tells you which seal design you're dealing with, before you spend $1. Now, you might be wondering why an engine with a leak built into it is on a 300,000-mile list at all. It isn't the strongest one here. Most truck versions left the factory somewhere around 200 to 250 horsepower, and there are engines on this list that'll outwork it all day. And I need to be straight with you because on the face of it, this one looks like an exception to everything I've said. The first two lasted because of what the factory left out of them. This one lasts because of what isn't in the way. Pick a town with a stoplight and a parts store. They'll have gaskets for this engine on the shelf. The machine shop 2 towns over has done 100 of them. Heads, intakes, cams, rotating assemblies out of dozens of different GM vehicles bolt straight on. Nothing proprietary. Nothing that needs a dealer. Nothing that waits 6 weeks on a part number. Because 300,000 miles was never about never breaking. Everything breaks. It's about how much stands between the break and the fix. And on this engine, almost nothing does. Same argument. Other end of it. Every engine so far has told you something. A gauge, a tick, a spot on the concrete. This one doesn't. The Cummins 5.9 12 valve, the 6BT, 89 through 98 in the Dodge Ram, and it was never designed for a pickup at all. Cummins built it for case agricultural equipment. Dodge needed an answer to the big gas V8s, and what they got was a tractor engine with a license plate. Cast iron block, cast iron head, mechanical injection pump, mechanical injectors. The fuel system doesn't need a computer's permission to work, and it isn't fussy about fuel quality. Almost nothing on it depends on electricity to keep running. By every measure in this video so far, it's the toughest engine here. And it can be finished by a steel pin about the size of the end of your little finger. It's called the killer dowel pin. It sits in the front gear housing, and its only job was to line that housing up on the assembly line. After that, it does nothing, except vibrate. Most of the time, when it works loose, it drops harmlessly into the bottom of the timing cover or the oil pan and stays there for the life of the truck. But it can land in the timing gears instead. When that happens, the damage runs from a cracked gear housing at one end to a broken camshaft at the other. And at the far end of that, valves meeting pistons, and an engine that isn't worth rebuilding. There's no schedule to it. It's been reported on trucks around 150,000 miles, and on trucks well past twice that. It's time, vibration, and heat cycles, not mileage. And this is not your truck being weak. That's a decision somebody made on an assembly line in the 80s, and you've been carrying it ever since without anyone telling you. So the check isn't a symptom, because there isn't one. It's paperwork. Do you have documentation that a KDP tab has been fitted? If you don't, work on the assumption that it hasn't. The fix is a small retaining tab. Parts run under $100. It's an afternoon, a real one because you're pulling most of the front of the engine to reach it. And don't assume you're clear on an early VE pump truck. The risk is highest on the 94 to 98 P pump trucks, but the pin design is the same across the range. That's the one I opened with. If nobody had told you about it before now, hit the like button, because this is the kind of thing that only travels if people pass it along. Before the last one, I'm curious about something. How many of you already knew about that pin, and how many just went quiet? Tell me below. I read them. Right. The last engine, and this one starts with a problem I want you to solve before I tell you the answer. You're driving. Everything's normal. The engine stops. Crank's fine, won't fire. You sit 10 minutes, cycle the key, and it starts like nothing happened. A week later, it does it again. You change the fuel filter. It happens again. So work it through. A clogged filter starves an engine gradually. You lose power under load.